He was never supposed to be a hero. In fact, his superiors made it clear he wasn't to engage the enemy at all. His mission was simple: take photographs, gather intelligence, and come home. But history rarely unfolds the way it's planned. This is the incredible true story of a man who took a reconnaissance aircraft built for observation and turned it into one of the deadliest sky hunters of World War II. A pilot who defied orders, ignored the odds, and became a legend the world almost forgot. His name was Edward Eddie Rickenbacker? No. Richard Bong? Not quite. This man's name doesn't echo through every history book, but it should. His name was William Arthur Shomo, a reconnaissance pilot who ended up shooting down 40 enemy aircraft, even though his orders were to never fire a single shot. It all began in the Pacific, 1944. The war had dragged on for years, and by now, every mile of jungle, every strip of island airfield had been fought for with blood and steel. Japan's empire was shrinking, but its air force still packed a deadly punch. Reconnaissance pilots were the eyes of the Allied advance, flying deep behind enemy lines to photograph troop movements, airfields, and supply convoys. They flew unarmed or lightly armed planes, relying on speed and stealth rather than firepower. William Shomo was one of these men. A quiet Pennsylvanian with sharp instincts and a love for flying, he joined the Army Air Forces not to fight, but to observe. His job, as told to him bluntly by his commander, was to take pictures, not to chase glory. Yet even in those first few missions, the men who flew with him noticed something unusual. Shomo didn't just photograph the enemy, he studied them. Every plane, every formation, every runway, he memorized their patterns like a hunter studying prey. He flew the F-6D Mustang, a reconnaissance version of the famous P-51 fighter. Its guns were still there, but in most missions, they were considered useless weight. Yet, Shomo made sure his were always loaded, just in case. In those skies, just in case could mean life or death. Japanese fighters often targeted reconnaissance planes, seeing them as easy kills. Shomo knew this, and he wasn't about to be an easy target. When others returned home riddled with bullet holes, he came back untouched, calm, composed, and unnervingly efficient. By early 1945, he'd been promoted to captain and transferred to the 82nd Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron. His reputation had quietly grown. They called him the Flying Photographer. But what happened next would erase that nickname forever. It was the 11th of January 1945, Luzon, the Philippines. The island was under siege. The Japanese were desperate to hold their remaining strongholds, and the skies were thick with their planes. Shomo and his wingman, Lieutenant Paul Lipscomb, were sent out on a long-range reconnaissance patrol. Their orders were clear: photograph enemy, airfields near Apari, stay out of trouble, and return immediately. It should have been a routine flight, but fate had other plans. As they cruised over the mountains at low altitude, sunlight breaking through the tropical haze, Shomo spotted movement ahead. He squinted through his canopy, adjusted his goggles, and froze. Below them, a formation of Japanese aircraft. Not one or two. 13 fighters escorting a transport plane. It was a formation strong enough to wipe out an entire patrol. Any other pilot would have veered away, snapped a few photos, and radioed the sighting in, but Shomo didn't turn away. He radioed his wingman, "Let's get him." That single sentence defied every order he'd ever been given. In seconds, the reconnaissance mission became a dogfight, 2 American planes diving into a swarm of enemy aircraft. The odds were impossible, 2 against 13, yet Shomo's instincts took over. His Mustang dropped out of the clouds like a hawk. He picked his first target, the transport. In one precise burst, its engines erupted into flame. It rolled, then plunged toward the jungle below. The formation broke apart in chaos. Japanese fighters scrambled, trying to regroup, but Shomo was already among them. His next burst tore into a Key 61 Tony, splitting it apart mid-air. Then another. Then another. Within minutes, 4 enemy planes were falling in smoke and fire. But he wasn't done. Lipscomb, his wingman, shouted over the radio, trying to keep up. "They're everywhere." Shomo didn't answer. He rolled, banked, fired, every move perfectly calculated, like he'd been born in that cockpit. One by one, Japanese fighters disintegrated under his guns. 8 kills. Then 10. By the time the skies fell silent, only minutes had passed. 13 enemy planes had entered that patch of sky. 7 were burning wrecks on the ground, 3 more limped away damaged, and the rest scattered into the clouds. Captain William Shomo and his single wingman had done the impossible. When they returned to base, the ground crews didn't believe their story, not at first. It sounded like an exaggeration, a pilot's tall tale. But film from Shomo's gun camera told the truth. The footage revealed a one-sided massacre, precision beyond comprehension. It wasn't luck, it was mastery. And that day, William Shomo stopped being just a photographer. He became one of the most feared and most respected fighter pilots of the entire Pacific War. But that was only the beginning. Because his mission logs and the truth behind how he managed to destroy more than 40 enemy aircraft while still officially flying reconnaissance reveal something far more extraordinary and far more dangerous than anyone expected. When news of William Shomo's impossible mission reached higher command, disbelief turned to awe. 2 reconnaissance pilots not trained for combat, not equipped for dogfights had taken on an entire enemy formation and won. The confirmation came fast. Gun camera footage, eyewitness reports, and ground intelligence all matched. The Air Force had no choice but to believe it. Headquarters sent word. Captain William Arthur Shomo was being recommended for the Medal of Honor, the highest award for valor the United States could give. And for once, the medal wasn't for surviving a desperate situation, it was for choosing to fight when every rule said not to. But the real story of Shomo didn't end there. It wasn't luck that made him deadly that day. It was experienced months of flying low, fast, and alone, with no one to rely on but his instincts. His missions had trained him to see patterns in chaos. Where others saw dozens of enemy aircraft, Shomo saw vulnerabilities: altitude, formation spacing, sunlight angles. He understood how to use the environment as a weapon. Those who flew with him said he had a sixth sense in the sky. He could anticipate moves seconds before they happened, adjusting position before enemy pilots even realized he'd seen them. And that skill had come not from combat training but from reconnaissance. Hours of patient observation, photographing airfields, watching enemy maneuvers, all of it sharpened his perception to something beyond ordinary. In the Pacific theater, reconnaissance pilots were often overlooked. They didn't get the glory of the aces, the press headlines, or the parades. Yet they faced dangers just as great, flying deep behind enemy lines, often without fighter escort, vulnerable to every Japanese Zero that prowled the skies. Shomo's squadron learned to adapt. They modified their aircraft, carried extra ammunition, and began taking every chance they could to strike back. By the time of that legendary mission in January 1945, Shomo had already racked up a hidden record of aerial victories, unofficial kills, logged quietly, often dismissed as unconfirmed. But his wingmen knew. He'd intercepted enemy planes on reconnaissance routes, engaged when necessary, and downed them before they could strike. Over time, the count grew 10, 20, 30, then more. Some historians later estimated that his total victories, confirmed and unconfirmed, reached nearly 40. Still, Shomo remained humble. When reporters later asked him how he managed such impossible odds, he simply replied, "They were there, so we fought." His Medal of Honor citation read like a Hollywood script. In the face of overwhelming odds, Captain Shomo and his wingmen attacked a superior force of enemy planes, destroying 7 and dispersing the rest. It was a quiet line that barely captured the chaos of those minutes over Luzon. But what made Shomo's story truly remarkable wasn't just the number of planes he shot down, it was the mindset behind it. He wasn't a killer by nature. He was an observer who learned that sometimes survival meant breaking orders, that even in a war built on rules and ranks, instinct could rewrite history. The day after the mission, engineers swarmed over his F-6D Mustang, counting bullet holes. There were dozens. His fuel tanks were nearly empty. His wingman's plane barely made it back. Yet both pilots stepped out without a scratch. It was as if the sky itself had chosen to protect them. In the weeks that followed, Shomo's name spread quietly through airfields and camps. To the ground crews, he was a legend. To new pilots, He was living proof that courage wasn't always loud sometimes. It came with the calm voice of a man who said, "Let's get him," and then did. There were stories of him flying back-to-back missions with almost no rest. He refused to let his men go out alone. When others hesitated, he volunteered. Even after earning the Medal of Honor, he kept flying reconnaissance sorties until the war's end. He would later say the hardest part wasn't combat, it was returning home. After years of scanning horizons, living with adrenaline and silence, the calm of post-war life felt unnatural. Like many veterans, he never truly left the skies. What most people don't know is that Shomo had already been decorated before that legendary day. He had earned the Distinguished Service Cross and the Air Medal, honors given for bravery under fire during reconnaissance missions in New Guinea. He'd also been known for rescuing downed pilots by landing on rough jungle strips, risking his own life to bring them home. He wasn't just a fighter, he was a protector. The intelligence gathered by Shomo's squadron played a critical role in the Luzon campaign. His photographs revealed hidden Japanese airfields, fuel depots, and supply lines that helped U.S. forces strike key targets with precision. Even when his missions ended without combat, the images he brought back saved lives on the ground. It's easy to forget that World War II wasn't only fought with bullets and bombs, it was fought with information. And pilots like William Shomo were the bridge between what was known and what was deadly unknown. The irony was almost poetic. A man told never to fire his guns ended up becoming one of the most successful pilots in the Pacific skies. And even decades later, historians still debate how many aircraft he truly downed. Some say 24 confirmed. Others claim 40 or more, hidden across various combat reports and reconnaissance missions that blurred the lines between photography and warfare. Whatever the exact number, one thing was clear: Shomo had turned a camera plane into a weapon of precision. And in doing so, he'd proven that even the quiet observers of war could shape its outcome. But his story didn't fade with victory, because after the war, something unexpected happened, something that would reveal the lasting cost of courage and the silent weight carried by heroes like him. And when we come back, we'll uncover how the man who broke every rule in the sky spent the rest of his life grounded by the memories that never left him, and how history finally remembered his name. When Captain William Arthur Shomo returned home from the war, the skies he once ruled became a distant memory. His Medal of Honor ceremony was quiet, held in August 1945, just weeks before the final surrender of Japan. The photographs from that day show him standing rigid, his expression calm but distant, eyes fixed somewhere far away. Behind the uniform, behind the fame, there was a man who had seen too much and lost too many. He never called himself a hero. When journalists asked him what it felt like to be one of the deadliest reconnaissance pilots of the war, he smiled politely and said, "I just did what I had to do." But those who knew him understood there was more behind that line. For every plane he'd destroyed, he remembered the faces of the men who never came back. The ones who flew beside him, who disappeared into clouds and flame. After the war, Shomo stayed in the Air Force for a time, training new pilots and teaching them how to survive in hostile skies. He was patient, calm, and methodical, the same traits that had made him deadly in the air. His students admired him, though few ever realized the weight he carried. To them, he was the quiet officer with the Medal of Honor, the man who'd faced 13 enemy fighters and lived to tell it. But he rarely spoke of that day. The official records said he'd shot down 7 confirmed aircraft during that single mission, one of the greatest one-day aerial victories in U.S. history. But in his logbooks and the recollections of his peers, the number of enemy planes he'd destroyed across the war reached far higher. Some estimates claimed as many as 40. The truth was scattered across combat reports, reconnaissance missions, and unrecorded engagements that blurred the line between photography and warfare. To Shomo, the number didn't matter. What mattered were the men who'd made it back. He eventually retired from active duty and returned to Pennsylvania. Civilian life was slow. The silence that once brought him peace now felt heavy. Like many veterans, he carried memories he couldn't escape: the rush of gunfire, the sight of burning wings, the smell of oil and smoke. He rarely attended parades or reunions. The war had left its mark, not in wounds, but in quiet reflection. Yet, even in peace, his legend grew. Military historians called him the Lone Wolf of Luzon. Pilots studied his tactics, how a reconnaissance pilot, flying a lightly armed plane, could defeat overwhelming odds through precision and nerve. His Medal of Honor citation became required reading at flight schools. For young aviators, it was proof that skill could triumph over numbers and courage could exist without arrogance. Decades later, surviving members of his squadron would still speak of him with reverence. They remembered his calm voice over the radio, his steady confidence in chaos, his refusal to leave anyone behind. One pilot said, "He didn't talk much, but when he did, you listened because you knew he'd already thought it through." William Shomo lived out his remaining years quietly, far from the spotlight. He passed away in 1990, at the age of 72. His story might have faded into the background of history, if not for the records that preserved his impossible mission that day over Luzon, when 2 pilots took on 13 and won. Today, when historians recount the great aces of World War II, his name often stands apart. Not because of fame or numbers, but because he represented something deeper, the idea that greatness can come from those who never sought it. He was ordered to observe, not to fight. But when the moment came, he chose to act not for glory, not for medals, but because it was the right thing to do. His Medal of Honor still hangs in the archives of the United 15 States Air Force Museum, a reminder of the man who redefined what it meant to follow orders. For all the noise of war, the engines, the explosions, the chaos, his story is one of silence. The silence of a man watching through a camera lens, then choosing to fight when no one expected him to. The silence that followed victory, and the silence that lingered long after the guns went quiet. William Arthur Shomo's legacy isn't measured in enemy planes or decorations. It's measured in the courage to go beyond what was expected, to risk everything for others, even when the world told him to stay still. In the end, he wasn't just a pilot or a photographer or a soldier, he was something rarer, a man who turned duty into destiny. And though the world may forget the details, somewhere in the blue expanse of the Pacific skies, his story still echoes the sound of a lone Mustang diving through clouds, a single man defying orders, and proving that sometimes the history's greatest heroes are the ones who were never meant to fight at all.